Hey y'all, this is Amanda and welcome back to my Texas Zone 8A garden. And today we're going to be talking about whether or not it's worth spending your money to buy mums for the fall season. Okay, so I've actually done a couple of videos on mums before. Most recently, I did a video on heirloom chrysanthemums that I'm going to be growing in the spring. And these are chrysanthemums that are grown for really long stems, and they're grown for more like florist type of work, so arranging flowers. I've also done a video on mums that are seasonal mums, like our fall mums, and how I utilize them in my garden. So today, what I really wanted to talk about was whether or not it is worth spending money on mums for the fall. This is going to be a completely divided group of people in the video. You're either going to love them or you're going to hate them. Some of my favorite gardeners love mums. Some of my favorite gardeners hate mums. So it really just depends on the person. I really think it depends on the location, and I also really think it depends on your budget. So a little bit about the mums that I'm going to be talking about today. I am talking about the mums that right around, end of August into September, you start seeing these beautiful pots of yellow, rust, red, purple, white, beautiful mums showing up at your local nurseries or at the big box stores. It's that time of year when everybody has pumpkins, everything is getting just beautifully set up for fall, and it's so tempting as soon as you walk in to see all those beautiful colors and just want to snatch everything up and bring it home with you. Now let's talk about what, if you're going to buy a mum, what type of things you might be looking for before you buy it. Number one thing, you need to look at what condition the mum is in. Is it wilted? If it's wilted, you don't want it. Mums are big, water-hungry plants. They like fertilizer, they love water. They're going to need nice, consistent, wet soil throughout their entire growing period of time. A lot of times you're going to find them wilted in the big box stores or nurseries. I would stay away from those. Yes, a little water might pump them up, but I would go ahead and start with a plant that has not been stressed, that does not look like it has any wilting on it. Secondly, you're going to be looking for a plant that has closed, tight buds. We do not want to buy a plant that has all of its flowers blooming. That plant only has about a week and a half to 2 weeks left. What we're looking for is a plant that has nice, closed, tight buds. That way, you still have 4 to 6 weeks of blooming time from that plant. Now, one of the hard things about that, it's really hard to tell what color that mum is going to be. Hopefully it's labeled. If it's not, you can pick off one of the larger buds, ones that maybe look like it's about to pop, and go ahead and peel it open, and you might be able to tell what color the petals are inside it. But always, always, always buy the potted mums that have nice, closed, tight buds. Do not buy them all bloomed out. You're going to waste your money. There's not going to be enough time for them to go through another bloom cycle before the winter arrives. And the third thing when buying mums at a nursery or big box store is stay away from the decorative pots, right? Now, if you're buying for convenience and you want to go ahead and get a pre-potted plant, the whole thing done, by all means. But for those gardeners who like to create their own potted designs or are going to be planting these in their garden, stay away from any of the beautiful decorated pots that they will put the mums in. You're going to be paying at least $7 to $10 more just for that pretty pot. So go ahead and look for the ones that are in, those basic kind of gardener nursery cans, like the basic plastic ones with the holes in the bottom, nothing impressive, nothing pretty. That is going to be way more cost effective than buying one that is in a beautiful container. Now, most garden mums are triggered by the amount of light available to them throughout the day. Most mums won't begin setting their buds until they've had at least 10 hours of nighttime outside, all right? So it's really based on a specific amount of light. Once they're getting about 10 hours of nighttime, they'll start to set their buds and they'll start getting ready to bloom. It takes about 6 to 10 weeks after they first set their buds to actually go into full bloom and be done for the season. Now, mums really do enjoy a little bit of cool weather. They're also fun with the heat. Towards the end of the summer is when all of my mums start budding up. The ones that I keep in my garden, planted up in my garden, they all start budding up in the heat at the very end of the summer. And then as we get a little bit chillier and by chilly, I mean this is zone 8A, I mean like 90 degrees. We don't have true fall here. But once the temperatures drop a little bit is when they tend to start flowering at that point in time. And while they do like the cooler weather, they do not like freezing weather. So once you get a good frost or freeze come through, they will all die back. Which brings me to utilizing mums as a perennial. In some zones, specifically my zone, zone 8A, there are a lot of mums that work really well as perennials in my garden. And I have grown mums in my garden as a perennial for many years. I'm a huge proponent of utilizing mums in your front landscape, in your back landscape. They're inexpensive. They tend to give me 2 or 3 bloom cycles. And they're just a really great, fantastic kind of backdrop plants, right? Huge, beautiful mums in the background, and then you kind of put beautiful annuals in front layering over them. Typically, if I'm going to buy a mum for a container design, it is going to be a mum that is in a color that I like so that I can utilize it in my planted garden beds after the season is done. Now, that might not be the choice for everyone. I like to stick to whites, yellows, purples, pinks. Those are the colors I typically like to include in my actual garden beds. That way, those plants or those mums will go with a wide variety of spring and summer blooms and not just speak to just fall. The rust colored mums I kind of stay away from because those tend to be something that just screams fall, and I want something that's going to blend better throughout the spring and summer seasons. So you might be asking, well, Amanda, how do you get multiple bloom cycles out of your mums? I'll answer that for you. So basically, coming out of winter, when we get to about that 10 hours of nighttime a day, as we're coming back out of the darker times of the year, that's when mums start setting a fresh set of buds once again. It's typically in the spring. Mine typically bloom end of April through May, touch to the beginning of June, just depends on how wonky our temperatures are at that time of year. And they'll put on their first set of buds. I'll allow them to bloom, and then I'll give them a good trim back. Now, sometimes I'll have a cooler beginning of the summer and I'm able to get a second round of blooms out of them before we hit July 4th. That's not always the case here in 8A. It really depends on how erratic our temperatures are. For this year, in this case, we had such high temps by mid to end of May and then straight through June and July. It was just so overbearingly hot that I only got one cycle of blooms at the very beginning of the spring, not the very beginning, the very end of the spring from my mums. And then I cut them back usually around July 4th is when I like to do that. The first, second, third week in July. And then they reset blooms. And then once we get about 10 hours a night again, they start setting new buds, which they've done right now. And we are within a week of everything starting to bloom. So like I said, I love including mums in my garden. A lot of gardeners don't really look at mums as a quote-unquote perennial or a big main player in the garden. They're typically treated as annuals, and it's all across the United States that they're treated like that. But I take a little bit of a different approach. I'm a little bit more budget conscious, so it's really hard for me to just have a plant and just throw it away, at the end, especially knowing it's a perennial and I can utilize it somewhere else. But I've kind of put up some pictures along the way to show you how I've utilized mums as a perennial within my garden bed. Now let's talk about a few things that mums prefer. They actually prefer full sun. They're going to bloom more profusely if they're in full sun than if they're in shade. In shade, the colors are going to be a little bit more dull. In the sun, they're going to be a little bit brighter. They also prefer a little bit more of the cooler temps. And truthfully, the colors will intensify if it's cooler in your area. They like that cold, and it makes their colors really pop. While mums really can thrive in any type of soil, they do prefer something that's pretty fertile if possible, and that's just going to give you a bigger plant and more blooms throughout the season. So adding compost and some type of slow release fertilizer, and perhaps, hitting them every couple of weeks with a liquid fertilizer of some type is really beneficial for them throughout the growing season. Now, mums have a really shallow root system, right? They don't reach really far down, which is kind of different for a perennial, right? So their roots are kind of within like 3 to 4 inches at the top of the soil, right? So they dry out very easily. So they are a very water hungry plant. If you have any kind of drought conditions, you might want to go ahead and run a drip to each mum to make sure that they are staying well watered throughout the season. If they go limp limp and really sad, like they're just drying out and sad, try to water them very quickly, move them to the shade, give them a little bit of relief. They may or may not bounce back. Most of the time they bounce back for me, but if they've been limp for a couple of days, it's probably not going to happen. Now, if you're just buying mums for your front porch or some fall decor and you're going to be tossing them at the end of the season, you could ignore this next part. If you're going to be putting mums in the ground and you're going to be utilizing them year after year as a perennial, you can do what's called pinching back. You might have heard me say that earlier. After I got a flush of blooms in the spring, I will pinch them back, hoping for a second wave of blooms prior to the heat. Now, no matter what, in my area, Zone 8A, if you want mums to bloom in the fall, you want to pinch back the mums starting around July 4th. You want to work in that second, third week of July. Pinch back your mums, pinch back the blooms, cut them back by a third. I don't actually like pinching each individual bloom. I like to just hack it back by a third and let it start fresh. That allows it to branch out instead of getting really tall and leggy. But you want to cut them back about the second or third week in July, and they'll put on a whole new set of blooms and be ready to bloom in the fall. Now, a lot of people ask, where do you like to buy your mums, Amanda? Well, I buy from the most inexpensive place I can that has the biggest, largest mums. That's pretty much it, and that does vary each season. Sometimes it's a local nursery, sometimes it's a big box store. It really just depends on where I'm going, what I'm looking for at the time. Now, if it's a perennial that I'm wanting to put into my garden, a perennial mum, I'm typically looking for a very specific color or a very specific bloom. Nowadays, you can get mums that are 2 to 3 inches wide across the bloom, which are beautiful. You can get tiny little petite ones that look like little bald dahlias. Absolutely gorgeous. There's a wide variety. So I'm always open to splurging a little bit more for something that's a little bit more unusual in shape and or color. But typically, if I'm going to be just utilizing them in my pots or containers, I'm going to pick something that's inexpensive because I know I'm just going to be done with it after the container. Okay, so now we come to the big question. Should I buy mums? Is it worth spending my money on mums? Do I really want to put that amount of money into something that's not going to last as long? Well, of course, the answer is different for everybody. For me, yes. I get a lot of joy from the bright, beautiful colors of mums, especially in my fall containers and across my front porch. I love the fall. I think mums just sing fall to me. However, on the back end, I like to take those mums and I like to put them in my garden and utilize them as a perennial. And doing so makes it a little bit easier to swallow the price of spending something on mums. However, like I said, a lot of my favorite gardeners, they're not fans of mums. They don't last long enough and they're just toss-aways at the end of the year. And so I can completely understand if that's something that they're not interested in. Like I said, it's going to be different for each individual gardener, right? So you should definitely do what works best for you, your garden space, and what brings you joy. Now, let's talk about, let's say you don't like mums. Is there another option? Is there something else that we can do to bring that beautiful color impact in the fall, but not something like a mum, not something that's going to die pretty quickly and won't last very long? Definitely. Here's a couple of the ones that I really like to utilize as an alternative to something like a mum. Celosia is one of my favorites. It comes in big, bright, beautiful colors, and it makes beautiful, bold statements for the fall. I also really enjoy utilizing something like asters. Asters are a great perennial, which is wonderful, and they come in bright, bold colors, and there's lots of little bitty blooms across the whole plant, which kind of mimics the effect and shape of a mum. I'm a huge proponent of coleus in the fall. As you can tell, bold, beautiful, bright tones for the fall. It makes a huge statement. They're pretty cost effective and they really kind of have that wow factor to them. Also, if you let them go to seed at the top, allow them to flower, you can recollect those seeds. You can collect those seeds for next year, or you can take cuttings of your coleus and root them in for plants for next year as well. I also love tucking in pansies and violas because they have beautiful, bright, bold colors. They're kind of lower growing, which is beautiful as well, especially if you're kind of wanting to create a lot of height and contrast within a container. They're really great for draping over the side of container, and they typically do well into some cooler temps. And my last suggestion, if you're not into fall mums, but you really want that fall color, fake it. Go to a local craft store, go to a big box store, grab a couple of sprigs of beautiful fall leaves and tuck them in among your plants. Make it look like they've just, drifted from the sky and settled within your container. That's totally acceptable as well. It's a really great way to turn like a summer container or an all shade container or something like that. Just tucking in a sprig of fall leaves and beautiful oranges and reds and deep browns and allowing it to have a little touch of color without investing in a brand new plant. Plus, those fake leaves, you can utilize those year after year. Okay, you guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. As you can tell, I'm pro for buying the mums. Go ahead and drop me a comment below. Are you pro mums or are you no mums? Any answer is acceptable. Please be kind to each other no matter which direction you end up going. Also, if you have any tips for growing mums or how you've gained success from getting them to bloom longer, have brighter colors, or have any suggestions like that, make sure you drop that below and share it with all of us so that we can all kind of be successful from your knowledge. Okay, I hope you enjoyed today's video. As always, she's a mad gardener or decorator or anything else that she wants to be. Thanks, y'all.